What if I told you that one bullet, fired in a quiet European city in 1914, set the entire world on fire? That the death of one man triggered a chain reaction that would kill millions, topple empires, and forever change the course of history? This is the story of World War I, the war that was supposed to end all wars, but instead gave birth to an even deadlier one. Welcome to our journey into the Great War. If you're fascinated by history, by the decisions and disasters that shaped the modern world, then you're in the right place. Stay with us, because this is not just a story of battles and generals. It is a story of ordinary people, of unimaginable suffering, of courage and tragedy on a scale the world had never seen before. The year was 1914. Europe seemed powerful, industrial, and unstoppable. But beneath the glittering surface, tensions were boiling. The great powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, were tangled in rivalries, bound by secret treaties, and armed to the teeth. National pride and old grudges created a dangerous powder keg, and all it needed was a spark. That spark came in the city of Sarajevo in the Balkans, a region already nicknamed the Powder Keg of Europe. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie rode through the streets in an open car. Waiting for them was a young Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. With a pistol in his hand, Princip fired 2 shots. The Archduke and his wife were killed. The world did not yet know it, but those 2 shots would unleash catastrophe. Austria-Hungary, enraged by the assassination, blamed Serbia. Backed by its ally Germany, Austria-Hungary issued harsh demands. Serbia, supported by Russia, refused to give in completely. Within weeks, the system of alliances turned a regional crisis into a global one. Germany declared war on Russia, then on France. Britain, honoring its treaty with Belgium, declared war on Germany after German troops invaded Belgian territory. Suddenly, the major powers of Europe were all at war. By August 1914, the Great War had begun. Excitement swept through the capitals. Young men cheered as they marched off to war, believing they would be home by Christmas. The generals of every nation promised a swift and glorious victory. But the world was about to discover something very different. Modern industrial weapons had made old strategies obsolete. Instead of quick battles of movement, armies were about to dig in and bleed in ways humanity had never seen. The age of trench warfare was about to begin. The soldiers who marched off in 1914, with flags waving and bands playing, quickly discovered that this was not the war they had been promised. By the end of that first autumn, the battle lines in Western Europe had frozen into a deadlock. From the North Sea to Switzerland, both sides dug into the earth, carving out a vast network of trenches. These trenches became home and hell for millions of men. Mud, rats, lice, and the constant threat of death from above or across no man's land defined daily life. Soldiers lived knee-deep in filth, surrounded by the stench of unburied corpses and the deafening roar of artillery. Between the opposing lines lay a wasteland of barbed wire, craters, and shattered trees. No man's land. When orders came to attack, men climbed from their trenches and charged into machine gun fire. Whole battalions could be cut down in minutes. At the Battle of the Somme in 1916, the British suffered nearly 60,000 casualties on the first day alone. The bloodiest day in their military history. Artillery thundered day and night, churning the ground and burying men alive in their dugouts. Poison gas, first chlorine and later mustard gas, rolled across the lines, burning lungs and blinding soldiers. Flamethrowers, tanks, and airplanes added new horrors to the battlefield. The Western Front became a war of attrition, a grim contest to see which side could bleed the other dry. Millions of lives were spent for mere yards of ground. But while the trenches of France and Belgium became the iconic symbol of World War I, the conflict spread far beyond Western Europe. On the Eastern Front, Germany and Austria-Hungary faced Russia in vast mobile battles across the plains. In the south, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening new fronts in the Middle East. Battles raged in Gallipoli, Mesopotamia, Palestine, and the deserts of Arabia. In Africa, colonial troops fought and died in campaigns that stretched from the Sahara to the jungles of East Africa. And at sea, the mighty navies of Britain and Germany clashed, while German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking ships without warning. World War I was no longer a European war. It had become a global struggle, pulling in colonies, dominions, and nations from every continent. And yet, despite the scale of destruction, neither side could break the stalemate. The years dragged on. From 1914 to 1917, millions perished, but the front lines barely moved. Soldiers endured endless misery, while civilians at home faced shortages, hunger, and fear. Propaganda fueled hatred, while governments demanded total commitment from their people. But in 1917, everything began to change. A new force, powerful, fresh, and determined, was about to enter the war: the United States of America. By 1917, the war had dragged on for 3 long years. Europe was exhausted. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, held firm, but their people suffered hunger and unrest. The Allies, Britain, France, Russia, and their partners, had lost millions, and morale was crumbling. Then, in the East, came a shock that changed everything. Russia, torn apart by revolution, collapsed into chaos. In 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power, and soon after, Russia signed a peace treaty with Germany. The Eastern Front was closed. For Germany, it seemed like a chance to finally win the war. But across the Atlantic, a new power was rising to tip the balance. For years, the United States had remained neutral. President Woodrow Wilson urged Americans to stay out of the conflict, calling it a European war. But Germany's actions made neutrality impossible. German U-boats waged unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking not only military ships but civilian vessels. The most infamous incident came in 1915, when the British ocean liner Lusitania was sunk, killing nearly 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. Outrage grew in the United States. Then came the Zimmermann telegram. In early 1917, Britain intercepted a secret German message to Mexico, promising to help Mexico reclaim lost territory from the United States if it joined the war against America. When the message was revealed, the American public was furious. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. President Wilson told Congress, the world must be made safe for democracy. At first, America's army was small and inexperienced. But the United States possessed vast resources, modern industry, and a population eager to fight for freedom and justice. Within months, American troops, the Doughboys, began arriving in Europe by the hundreds of thousands. Their arrival electrified the Allies. At last, there was fresh strength, new energy, and a sense of hope. The German High Command knew time was running out. In the spring of 1918, Germany launched a desperate offensive on the Western Front, hoping to win before American forces could fully deploy. At first, the Germans pushed deep into Allied lines, advancing closer to Paris than they had since 1914. The world held its breath. But then, American soldiers entered the fight in full force. At battles like Cantigny, Belleau Wood, and Saint-Mihiel, they proved themselves fierce and determined fighters. At Belleau Wood, U.S. Marines fought with such ferocity that the Germans nicknamed them Teufelsschund Devil Dogs. By the summer of 1918, the Allies had regained the initiative. With American manpower and supplies flooding in, they launched a series of offensives that pushed the exhausted German army back. The 100 Days Offensive, beginning in August 1918, shattered German lines. Town after town was liberated. German soldiers, hungry and demoralized, surrendered in droves. At home, strikes and protests spread through Germany, and the Kaiser's empire began to crumble. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns finally fell silent. After 4 years of slaughter, World War I was over. Across the Western Front, soldiers cautiously emerged from the trenches, stunned by the sudden quiet. Bells rang out in Paris, London, and New York. The Great War had ended. But peace would not be simple. The guns had fallen silent, but the world left behind was shattered. More than 16 million people were dead, countless more wounded, and entire landscapes reduced to wasteland. Cities lay in ruins, economies were broken, and entire generations of young men were gone. The victors gathered in Paris in 1919 to decide the future. At the Palace of Versailles, leaders from the Allied powers, including Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, and David Lloyd George of Britain, sought to craft a peace settlement. But peace proved as bitter as war. The Treaty of Versailles placed the blame squarely on Germany. It demanded crushing reparations, stripped Germany of territory, limited its military, and humiliated its people. Wilson had come to Europe with his vision of a fair and lasting peace, a new world order built on his 14 points. But in the end, compromise and vengeance won out. Germany signed the treaty under protest. Its people felt betrayed and broken. Across Europe, new nations were carved from the wreckage of fallen empires: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and more. The Austro-Hungarian Empire dissolved. The Ottoman Empire collapsed, leaving the Middle East divided under British and French control. For many, the war to end all wars had created only new divisions and resentments. Millions celebrated peace, but the seeds of future conflict had already been planted. In the United States, soldiers returned home hailed as heroes. But the nation quickly turned inward, weary of foreign entanglements. Wilson's dream of joining the League of Nations collapsed when Congress refused to ratify the treaty. America had tipped the balance in the Great War, but now it stepped back from global leadership. And yet, the world would never be the same. World War I changed everything: politics, society, technology, and warfare. It marked the end of old empires and the birth of a modern age, scarred by loss and longing. But the unresolved anger, the humiliation of Germany, and the unstable peace left by Versailles would, just 2 decades later, ignite a new and even greater fire: World War II. The Great War was not truly the war to end all wars. It was the beginning of a violent century that still echoes today. World War I was more than battles and treaties. It was a turning point for humanity, a reminder of both our courage and our capacity for destruction. What do you think was the most important consequence of the Great War? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this journey through history powerful, give this video a like and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. And don't forget to subscribe, because we've got even more stories of the past that shaped our present coming your way. Until next time, remember the lessons of history, and never forget the war that changed the world.